pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. Stoddard, would you please take the roll call? Yes, sir. Angelina Barnes. White Hands White.
Present.
Jason Hanselman. Greg Stoddard here. John Tramontana here. Lisa Truscott.
Here.
And Brad Weaver. We have one. Great, thanks. We're going to turn over the budget hearing right to Rob Stagnell.
Thank you. Thank you. So we're going to go through this. A lot of what you've seen is what we've been talking about the last few months. There's really no new information, if you will. And then just as a caveat, as we get into this, we did build our budget based upon the governor's proposal. So that's what I'll focus on, even though we'll have some House and Senate versions of their budgets out there. And just by way of note, we do not have a final state budget. They're predicting by the end of June, early July, the state aid budget should be set. But as of right now, we do not have a finalized state budget. So as we look at the governor's proposal, again, this is by way of review. The governor proposed a $435 foundation increase. That's for all districts, so we're removed from the 2X formula of the past. The governor has also proposed an increase in the categorical for special ed, as well as an increase in funding for the at-risk categorical. Retirement rate, which is actuarially determined, is flat year over year. We've got a slight increase built in just because of the fact that there's multiple plans and newer staff go on plans that currently are a little bit more costly, if you will, than existing plans. And then the good news is the governor has continued all the categoricals that were in play this year related to retirement, as well as the categoricals for early literacy and voc ed. Senate proposal, I'll go through really quick, just so you have the comparison. So it's a $450 foundation increase, no changes in the special ed categorical or in the at-risk categorical. And then similar to the governor, retirement's the same, the retirement categoricals are the same, and the early literacy and voc ed categorical is the same. House proposal differs a little bit from what the governor and the Senate have put out. It's a $300 per pupil foundation increases versus the $400 plus that we saw in the House and governor. There is an increase in special ed categorical that was actually a little bit higher than what the governor proposed, but no change in the at-risk categorical. Retirement rate again is flat. They've continued funding for the MIPSER's cost offset and the retirement normal cost offset categoricals, but they proposed $1 billion plus increase in the retirement UAAL. If this was to pass, it would have a net bottom line impact of 0 for districts because it's a flow through. The revenue that we receive, we statutorily are required to then remit to the retirement system. So it comes in, and then about 10 days later, give or take, depending on when we get the state aid, it goes out. And that's statutorily because originally when they started funding the UAAL, they wanted to just cut a check directly to the retirement system. In law, it says that the state can't do that, schools have to, so they came up with a mechanism of giving the money to the schools, and then the schools have to turn around and pay it. So that's why you see that in and that out. This budget projection has not changed from what you saw in May, and it's slightly changed from what we saw in April. And I'm going to only focus on the governor column since that's what we built the budget on. So our starting point is our 21-22 budget. So we had about a $22,000 deficit in 21-22, so that becomes the starting point. The foundation increase of $435 on the governor's proposal is about $1,341,000 of revenue. The increase in the special ed categorical is about $113,000. If you'll recall, we're looking at about a 31 FTE student enrollment decrease, so that revenue loss is about $283,000. And then similarly, we know we're going to have an adjustment down in our voc ed revenue from CC RISA. We've got a $50,000 estimate built into the budget currently. Back last summer, or maybe early fall, we did sell a bus. That was a one-time revenue stream, so we have to take the $22,000 out for that. And then our ESSER 2 funds will be spent this year, so that's removing the $150,000 of ESSER 2 funding. The rest of the lines are expenditure lines. You'll see the wage adjustments for our union groups, DEA, DAA, DESPA, as well as our non-affiliated. The teacher steps, longevity, lateral pay increases are built into there. We've also built in the increase estimates for medical, dental, and vision. The retirement rate, as I told you, is fairly flat. We've got about a $10,000 increase built into the budget as we make those adjustments. In the 21-22 year, mid-year, we brought in a half FTE for a special ed position, so that half FTE reflected here makes that position whole going into next year. And then similarly, we had to bring in 2 special ed paras mid-year, So it's 2 positions, but it's half FTE each to make both of those whole going into the 22-23 year. The next line is an addition for athletic coaching positions and officials. We built those into the budget, but until we have a final state budget, we're not going to make a move on those. But that would add our athletics department covering the cost of some salaries related to bowling and lacrosse, and then some officials' wages related to hockey. We had an estimated increase for property casualty insurance, about $13,000. Good news on that is we got our renewal rate late last week, and we're within a few $100 of that estimate, so we pretty much hit that target. And then increase for substitute rates. So we're really hoping to do that, but again, we need to let the governor's House and Senate reconcile out the budget process and get something finalized before we'd officially make those adjustments. We have 2 teacher retirements that were built into this budget. 1 position is replaced. So we've got about $142,000 savings there. And then finally, if the budget allows, we're looking to add an elementary dean of students into the budget for next year. So that gets us a bottom line of about $60,000 deficit on the governor's side. You'll see it actually, it's just under 59 when we get to our budget. Diving a little bit deeper, looking at revenue specifically in the general fund, the board approved about $35.9 million in December of revenue. We're looking at just over $35 million of projected revenue for 22-23, which is an actual decrease of about $853,000. Now you might say, why we have a net decrease in revenue when we're actually seeing some increases in foundation and other things. That's what this will cover. So our state revenue is down about $170,000. The first 3 bullet points we saw on the slide 2 prior, which shows the foundation increase, the special ed categorical increase, and the decrease in student enrollment. The bottom 2 lines are kind of new. The big one is the 4th bullet point. We have 2 one-time revenue streams, per pupil equalization and an innovative fund categorical that we have to remove from the budget that were in there in 21-22. There's also corresponding expenditures that tie to those. So as the revenue comes off, so does the expenditure. So it nets out as a net 0, but we got to decrease the revenue and the expenditures to remove that. And then the bottom bullet point is just a couple categoricals within our state aid that had some changes, and a small net decrease of about $11,000. So that gets you to the net state revenue decrease. Similarly, on the federal revenue side, we're seeing a decrease overall of about $610,000. That's primarily due to the summer school credit recovery and then the required state stipends that we paid the staff that ran those programs last year. Those were one-time programs, so we removed the revenue. We also removed the expenditure, so that has a net impact of 0. And then removing the federal ESSER 2 funds of about $150,000 accounts for the remaining $610,000. And then our final revenue line is our transfers and other, and that's down about $72,000, and that takes into account the VOCA from CC RISA as well as the bus sale. Shifting focuses to expenditures, again about $35.9 million is what was approved in December. We're now projecting about $35.1 million, which is a decrease of about $816,000. Fairly consistent with the decrease you saw on the revenue side. The breakdown of that, here are the major areas of adjustment. I'm not going to go through those because we went through those on the slide with the numbers, but I will just highlight the last 2 bullet points that does show the removal of the one-time expenditures for the state per pupil equalization and innovative funds categorical, as well as the removal of our federal summer school credit recovery and summer staff stipends. So when we take all that we've been talking about for the last 4 or so months, this is how the budget shakes out from a numbers perspective. It's about $35 million in revenue, as we talked about on the slide prior. It's about $35.1 million on the expenditures, which gives us about a $59,000 deficit projected for 22-23. We're looking at a just under $4.9 million fund balance to start the year. We're looking at just over $4.8 million as we end the 22-23 year, which puts us at a fund balance of about 13.75%. So that is our general fund in a nutshell. We do have 3 other funds that need approval tonight. The first is our community ed budget. With community ed, it's a budget that's been unusual the last couple of years with COVID. We've had restrictions on numbers in classrooms and everything. So we built this budget assuming that program will continue as normal, meaning pre-pandemic normal, as far as numbers and staffing and all of that. We will make adjustments as needed once we get into the year if things do end up looking different. We've also built in a $1 per day increase in our kids program rates for next year. Our community ed director surveys other child care providers and programs in the area. That keeps us right in line. We're kind of right in the medium of what districts and others are charging. So that's a fairly consistent increase. And then we're not looking at an increase in preschool rates for this year, but we likely will do something next year. So when we look at the community ed budget, I know it's a little small on the screen, I apologize, but we've got about $944,000 of revenue projected. We've got about $964,000 of expenditures projected, and that puts us at looking at an ending fund balance of about $58,000. The reality is that our ending fund balance will be higher. If you'll recall from the federal grant presentation that we did maybe 2 months ago, we received a grant this year that we didn't originally budget for in our community ed budget. That's going to probably prop that fund balance up a couple $100,000 when we close out this year. So although we're looking at about a $58,000 ending projected fund balance, it's probably going to be closer to $250,000, which puts us back into line with where we were pre-pandemic, which is some good news. Food service is our next fund that we're required to have. Again, similar to community ed, we're going to assume that the programming will continue as normal. The big change you're going to see in the food service budget is that the last 2 years we provided free breakfast and lunch for all students. There's been no free, reduced, and full paying meals. That program federally is gone as of Friday for us, and so you're going to see a large decrease on the federal line, but in essence a corresponding increase on the local line as we go back to a model of fully paid meals and then free and reduced. We also have a 10-cent increase in our breakfast and lunch meal prices for next year and a 40-cent increase in our adult meal prices for next year. That's federally determined. We have a tool that we have to run through that calculates out what those increases need to be. And the reason that's done is the federal government doesn't want districts using the federal dollars to prop up the full paying meals. And so it does a calculation to tell us what our meal prices need to be. And then finally, we're continuing our capital outlay expenditures for equipment needs. That unfortunately was paused a little bit with some long lead time delays this year, alongside the fact that our food service program was really overwhelmed with the number of meals that they were preparing, so we weren't able to do some of the capital replacements that we would have otherwise liked to, but we're continuing that cycle. So with our food service budget, we're looking at about $881,000 in revenue, and you'll see a $520,000 increase on the local line. That's for the free meals going away and our full paid meals, and about a $503,000 reduction on the federal line. And then on the expenditure side, about $926,000, getting us a fund balance projected at the end of next year about $118,000, and that puts us in a good footing with that fund balance for food service. And then finally, we have our student school activity fund budget. This was a change in an accounting standard a few years ago. It became live technically in 1920, but there was a 1-year delay for schools, so the first year that this became active for us was in 2021. It's primarily a procedural function. We're required to have a budget, but school internal funds kind of got roped into this accounting standard, meeting these requirements, but it doesn't change the day-to-day activity of what these internal funds are doing. It's more an accounting function of things that I have to do at the end of the year, but part of that is that we have to have a budget approved for that fund. And then I gave a couple examples of what some of those internal funds are. So with this one, it's fairly simple. You just have to have a revenue and expenditure line item. I take about a 3-year average, and I took kind of a pre-COVID 3-year average. That's why you see 800 for both last year and this year. So it's a balanced budget, and then the fund balance is based upon our prior year audit. So that would conclude the budget presentation for this evening.
Any questions, Bob?
I have a question. The dollar increase for the kids program, I understand that it puts us in line with other districts, but I'm curious what our increases were last year and the year before, and if we need the money to operate.
We do need the money to operate because we did not increase meal or kids pricing the last couple of years.
Okay.
So we got into a cycle pre-COVID of doing some type of an increase every year, so that there wasn't a larger increase if you go a number of years. But with COVID, we held all of our rates with maybe like an activity fee that we may have adjusted a couple of years ago, but otherwise we kept things flat. So this kind of helps get us back up to where we would otherwise have been if we were doing some of those gradual increases.
Okay, and what is the cost?
There's about 8 or 9 different rates. I could share those with you afterwards if you want to see them, but it depends on if they're in the AM or the PM or if they're coming for the CLT half days or regular half days. So there's a lot of different rates, and then summer rates are different as well. So
I should probably know this, but is there any sort of financial assistance available to people if they can't afford it?
there are through, I don't know what the department's called, but it used to be DHS. We do there are a couple families that we receive DHS payments that offset that, so there is help available through the state. Yep, that's a good question.
Anything else, Margaret? Thanks,
Thank you.
Public communication, anybody have any way they want to address the board on the budget hearing only? This is budget hearing. Okay, with that, I will entertain a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, budget hearing is adjourned. We'll go right into the regularly scheduled meeting for June 13th. Call that to order. Please once again stand for the pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. Stoddard, will you please take the roll?
Jason Hanson, Brad Stoddard here, John Tomatano,
Here.
Lisa Trescott,
Here.
and Brad Weaver. Yep.
Great. I'll entertain a motion for adoption of the agenda.
So moved.
Support?
Okay. Moved and supported. Any discussion? Yeah, go ahead, Shauna. Well, we are going to amend this. I'm going to make item 4C. First off, instructional coaches and specialists, we are going to postpone this until the August meeting. And just as a point of reference for 4B, Mr. Decker is unable to join us tonight, so Dr. Spickard will take care of that presentation. Is that okay with the motion and the support? Oh, yeah. Who made the motion? Sorry, was it Lisa?
Yes.
Lisa and Brad.
No, I supported it.
Okay, Brad and Lisa. All those in favor of that amended motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, we have an agenda. We're going to start with presentations tonight, and we will kick it off with our Director of Athletics, Mr. Michael Bragg. Welcome.
Thank you. Try to make this as brief as possible. I know the agenda is full, but from an athletic standpoint, we're very grateful. Obviously, there's in athletics a lot of moving parts. This year, we faced a bus driver shortage. We faced an official shortage. So athletics is one that works, almost touches every aspect of our district, from community ed to the business office with Rob to Shauna's support in HR here in central office. So a lot of thanks. I want to thank Dr. Spickard for her support and the board. I know Jody is here, and this is, he's retiring, so I want to extend my gratitude to Jody for his support and mentoring and guidance these last 4 years, and same goes with Sean and Marie, and Marie's in attendance. And then certainly I would be remiss if I didn't thank Shauna. Shauna's our athletic assistant in the athletic office, and she really has redefined that role and is taking on more and more, especially from a social media standpoint, and trying to create information on the website so that families have that information. So we are, this last year we were at 1,009. That will go down a little bit, and I'm sure that you're aware of that, but the MHSA bases our classification on the count day, which we're about down 27, actually I think 27 students. Still Class A, still in the blue division in the CAAC. From the athletic standpoint, you can access our website, DeWittPanthers.net. And again, that's one of the things we've tried to do over the last couple of years, is to have more of an online presence, especially on social media. So you can follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and on Facebook. This last year, we hosted 257 different athletic events, 11 MHSA competitions. Just within the CAAC, we hosted 6 conference tournaments, and then hosting our own 7 DeWitt Invitationals. So this is a season-by-season comparison, just so you know what comes in and out of our athletic office and our athletic department. Looking at totals, we've got 27 different athletic programs, which includes 48 teams, encompasses 70 district-paid coaches. That does not include volunteer coaches. And then if you look at our total number of student athletes, 807, that's up 12 from what it was in 2021. This number, our spring sport numbers dipped coming out of COVID. When we lost our season in 2020, we went down about 50 students, and we're back up to about 23, so still a net loss from where it was pre-COVID in the spring. Don't want to bore you with numbers, but if you looking at comparisons, these are pretty consistent across, and usually we're right around 54 to 56, 57% for total percent of our student body that participates in athletics. As you would expect, to the number of our 3-sport student athletes compared to our 2-sport student athletes compared to our single-sport student athletes increases with less involvement. We do emphasize student athlete, and I'm very careful not to refer to them as football players or baseball players or lacrosse players, but they are student athletes, and we do emphasize the student first. Extremely proud of the fact that our student athlete average GPA is a 3.5, and the average GPA at the high school is about a 3.2, which if you look at that, for academic all-league in the CAAC, the cutoff is 3.5. So we have 281 student athletes that are academic all-league, which is about 2 out of every 3 of our student athletes, which is really remarkable. 85%, and I just used above a 3-point as a cutoff, but 85% of our student athletes carry a cumulative GPA of above a 3-point. Again, you know, with athletics, we firmly believe that our student athletes are going to be better when they're involved in something. Helps with time management and able to prioritize, and I think that you know, that is reflected here with you know, even by grade and then by season. Some of our athletic achievements, while you know, last year was just an absolutely outstanding year, one that I kind of needed to step back and take a look at. We had 14 MHSAA championships last year, so this is not 14, but still, you know, I can tell you there's a lot of schools around the area and around the state that would happily take this, and so we had 7 CAAC championships, 7 MHSAA championships. Just more specifically with the CAAC, football won its 16th consecutive in the CAAC. Swim and dive won its 2nd consecutive, and that would also be the 2nd consecutive within the blue. Obviously going from the red division, which is the middle of the 3 divisions, going up to the bigger schools, and we were the 2nd smallest school in the CAAC blue, and are still competing. Boys swim and dive won their 2nd consecutive this year, and then boys bowling won their 2nd consecutive, which also happened to be the 2nd in school history. With spring sports, baseball won its 2nd consecutive, 2 out of 3. Girls lacrosse won its 2nd consecutive and 2nd in school history, and then softball won its 2nd in the blue division. From an MHSAA standpoint, football, again, very successful, won its 6th consecutive district championship, 4th consecutive regional championship, and was by a matter of inches short of another state championship, but that runner-up finish was the 6th in school history. Boys soccer, again, did very well, won their 3rd consecutive district and their 2nd consecutive regional. And that their last year's regional was the 1st since 2011. Girls competitive cheer, you know, have the conversation with our coaches about what is success, because I don't want this to be the measure of success, and I think that you know, our cheer program emphasized, really lived up to that you want to be performing your best at the end of the season, and they didn't win a league, they didn't win a district, but they did earn a regional championship and punch their ticket to the state championship or state finals. For spring sports, girls lacrosse won their 2nd consecutive and 2nd in school history regional championship, and then softball won, and athletics finished this past Saturday. We had the golf team competing at the Meadows on the campus at Grand Valley State. They finished their season, and girls softball was knocked out in regional play. We, as a league, there are 19 schools in the CAAC. Each school honors its top 10 scholar athletes. So those 10 are based on the highest GPA, but they must have lettered, earned 2 varsity letters as seniors. So There are 5 of them. There are the other 5, and you know, when I talk about Shauna redefining the role, she's the mastermind behind all of these graphics that we, again, try to honor and recognize our student athletes. Our female athlete of the year was Morgan Bethard. She was a 3-sport student athlete going to Calvin University to play lacrosse. And then our male student athlete was Bryce Debry, 2-sport student athlete going to Hope College to play football. We honored those student athletes that are continuing their academics and athletics at the collegiate level with one signing. Pre-COVID, we used to do this at the end of every season. There's a national letter of intent signing day in November, and there's also one in February. After COVID, we wanted to make sure that we could recognize that entire class received all sorts of positive feedback, so now we do one in the spring. Again, pretty special group. 28 student athletes, their average GPA 3.567, and of the 28, 5 had above a 4 point. Couple of athletic accolades. Our football coach, Rob Zimmerman, was the National Federation of High School State Football Coach of the Year. He also received a very elite honor in that he was the National Coach of the Year. And from everything that I know, that's the first time that that's happened in any sport for a coach here at DeWitt High School. And then another special honor, the Michigan High School Football Coaches Association honors 2 scholar athletes, and Tyler Holtz, who's going to Brown University, received one of those 2 honors. I did want to point out our website, again, DeWittPanthers.net. If you are, I send these out weekly to our high school staff just so they know what's coming to try to minimize instructional interruptions. But if you click on this pause notes, that will give you the schedule for that week. If you're on campus and want to see what's happening, that will give you the schedule weekly, and that's updated in real time. Some of our athletic announcements that we've tried to use on social media, we've used, just for announcements. This one over here was for T-shirt sales for football trip down to the Silverdome, or to Silverdome. Adam knows what I'm talking about. Ford Field, the pre-sale of tickets, the spectator bus that was organized, and then we also put on their spring sport tryout information. We also like to recognize our student athletes. This was a good luck for wrestling and competitive cheer that was competing at states. And then Shauna took this upon herself to do this for seniors and senior night. So she lists all of those seniors, come out and support, and then she'll post one of these afterwards with just the seniors. Also like to recognize individuals. Coach Byers earned his 500th win in wrestling. She'll also do something like this after the fact of where they finished. And then, as I said, our athletic department touches almost every aspect of the district. One of those obviously is grounds. Rick Colgrove and his crew does a phenomenal job. And I do want to point out that this we can put in the archives with this actual being natural grass. That will be going away. But Rick really does a nice job and was honored by Pioneer Athletics for being recognized as one of the fields of excellence. So one of the improvements that we did have through some sponsors, we were able to purchase a 34-foot scores table, which is digital, and we can do some fun things with that. That's it. I was also thought I would take the opportunity to kind of update the board, if it's okay, on our club-funded sports. I think that's kind of been a recurring question. So just to kind of give you some context and history here, ice hockey is a club-funded sport, boys and girls bowling, along with boys and girls lacrosse. Those are all club-funded sports. Freshman baseball would also be a club-funded sport. And I want to be careful because those aren't, when we say club-funded, they are still a varsity sport. They're recognized by the MHSAA. They get to wear DeWitt jerseys. They're just club-funded, okay? And so I think that there's a misnomer that they're just club and they don't get to do anything else or compete. But they are a varsity sport. They will earn a varsity letter. They can compete at the MHSA in the MHSA tournament. They're just club-funded. Okay, so a little bit of historical context here. Ice hockey was established in 2001, 2002. The only thing that the district pays, and that was agreed upon at that time, is the head coaching position. There is one head coach. Okay, there is no paid assistant coaches. All other expenses are covered by the club, and as you would imagine, besides equipment and uniform, ice time is the most expensive. Okay. As far as boys and girls bowling, that was established in the 2017-2018 school year with a memorandum of understanding. Okay, and there were a group of parents who wanted bowling to be a varsity sport. So I believe that the school board got together with that club, and the club said, we will not ask the district for any funds, but we would like to become a varsity sport. So at that time, that's what was agreed upon moving forward. We have, and I have to tell you, pre-COVID, Dr. Dieter, Mr. Spagnolo and I were in agreement that we were going to try to have the district take on some of these expenses, okay? And obviously COVID wiped that out. We were able to add half of the boys varsity head coach and half of the varsity girls coach that the district has taken on. That leaves the other half of the boys position and the other half of the girls position that is still paid by the club. In addition to both of those have, that would be it. There are no JV positions for bowling. Okay, there are teams, but no coaching positions. And then again, it became an MHSA competitive sport at a no-cost basis for that 2017-2018 school year. Okay. For boys and girls lacrosse, that was established in 2005 as a JV boys team. The boys varsity created or established in 2006, girls 2008. Again, a memorandum of understanding in 2010. All expenses would be paid by the club. This year, the district has taken on the expense of the varsity head coach for boys, varsity head coach for girls. That leaves an unpaid or club-funded JV position for boys and a JV position for girls. Okay, and again, that their first season competing in the MHSA was 2010 and 2011. So, pending on budget projections moving forward, we do have a plan where we do want to take on some of these expenses. So, I don't know if there are any questions that you have.
Question along
Yeah.
that line, Mike. We've had some people, in comments ask us about the difference between a club sport and a school sponsor sport, how they get elevated. Can you briefly describe what that process is like and how someone becomes school sponsored as opposed to club?
Yeah, I think, just historically, the district has taken on under the athletic director umbrella, those sports that are honored by the MHSAA. So the only sport that we don't have that is honored or recognized by the MHSAA is skiing. We have all of the other ones. So I think that's kind of what's under the athletic director umbrella. I can tell you that I've gotten emails on, will the school sponsor equestrian, which we do have as a club, that would fall under the umbrella of the principal. Water polo, figure skating, archery, taekwondo. So those are all that, but again, it's hard to where to draw that line. So historically, we've just drawn the line on those sports that are honored by the MHSAA.
So MHSAA does not recognize some of those other ones that you?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Yep. And they're trying to be equitable, obviously, with boys and girls sports. There has been some talk about taking on esports, boys or boys volleyball, but those are probably the two that are maybe on the horizon.
Any other questions, Mike?
No, but thank you, that was a great report.
Good.
Congratulations on a
Good.
great year, Mike.
Yeah, thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Next, we will have Dr. Spickard with our K-8 benchmark assessments presentation.
Let's see if it'll find it. If not, I can log into this one. sometimes it doesn't. Brian put together a 40-slide presentation on our data, and I will do my best to get through that. This one will work here. The first 15 slides will be ones that you've seen twice already, so once in the beginning of the school year and then once in February when we review data. So I'll kind of quickly go through those and then get to the data. So we're obligated to, if I can get Drive to come up. There we go. So the first, like I said, first few slides, obviously legislation was passed saying that we need to do benchmark goals for the year, which we've done. And then we had to do a review of those goals in February at mid-year, and then take a review of those goals for K-8 at the end of the year. So that's what this presentation is for. We use NWEA for that particular data point. And NWA is map testing. So for those of you who aren't familiar with NWA, it's measures of academic progress, and it's a computer adaptive test. So students will keep getting questions to be able to fit within the level that they are at. So the more questions they answer correctly, the more difficult questions they'll get. We've had some parents say, why is my kid getting calculus questions? That's because they've worked their way up to that level. So NWA will start at their grade level and then advance from there on out. So our goals were set up to follow the RTI model, so saying that we would like to have 80% of our kids being at average or grade level or higher. So that was the goal, and we established that goal to try to beat that within 2 years, knowing that that would be kind of a lofty goal coming off of COVID. So that benchmark data, we wanted to make sure that we got at least halfway there this year and then worked on getting there the rest of the way next year. Obviously, it's a pretty rigorous goal, but one that we are really working to meet, and I'll be able to show you that data. So as a reminder, we have quintiles where the data is developed into. So these are what they would look like. High students are performing at about an 81st percentile, whereas average would be somewhere between the 40th and 60th percentile. This is what a grade level report looks like. And as you can see, the grade level RIP band down below, the blue would be how many students in your grade level that would be at the high level and then on down. So we tried to mimic that in our reporting as well. Class reports for the teacher are really useful. So this is just a sample of a class report. So a teacher can kind of pull up and see where their specific students fall within those bands. And then NWA provides resources for students. So if we have these 5 students here, we can actually give them more advanced work to meet them at where they are. And then if we have students who are struggling, like the 4 in the bottom, it will tell us what specific objectives we need to work on to help get those students up to the next RIP band level. This is what a student report looks like. So it shows trend data over the entire testing that the student has done and where they fit within those RIP bands. And then I think it's really important to realize that students are they're more than just a test score. So these tests are only on reading and math. They don't include science and social studies or any of our electives. And they're just on these given snapshots throughout the year. And this is what they would look like if you were to break down all students across the quintiles. Obviously, that's not how we want students to fall, but it's just to show you how they could fit for a reference. So again, we use the tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, so meaning those students who are struggling the most are the ones that we want to give the most prescriptive and multi-level support for. So a lot of the times your special ed will fall up into those tier where they're receiving individualized services. So the key, we have to segregate this data. So part of the state reporting says we have to take a look at our subgroups and how our subgroups have been affected. And so you'll see SED as socioeconomically disadvantaged, SOC as students of color, and then SWD as students with disabilities. So here's what the K-8 looks like altogether. So the K-8 shows fall, winter, and spring. And so in spring we have some more students than what we had in fall, but we have to remember that the content and the skill sets getting more rigorous. And we said that we wanted to be at 80%, so if you take a look at the blue, the green, and the yellow, we're close to 80%. So by next year, we hope that the yellow will be over the 80% mark. So this is for reading. And then for math, if we take a look at all of our K-8 data together, again, we're close to the 80% mark, but not quite there. And then here is with the subgroups. So you can see that male and female, there's not a huge gap there between our boys and girls, but we do have our other subgroups where we're showing more of those students are struggling and not at grade level. Same thing for math, taking a look at our subgroups. And it's interesting, if you look, boys typically perform better in math, which they did here, and girls in ELA, which they did here. But again, that's a pretty trivial difference between the two as far as that gap is concerned. The bigger gap that we're worried about are these students that are economically disadvantaged, students of color, and then students with disability. So here's grade level, and there's a lot of them. So I'm going to go through them pretty quickly, and then I'll kind of explain things. These are also available on the transparency page, and after tonight's meeting, they'll be available on the board website. So first grade, take a look overall. So we're about 60% proficient with those this is kindergartners. And you can take a look, a lot of the times our subgroups are going to mirror pretty much the same outcome. Our first graders getting closer. Second grade. So our third grade doing pretty well, considering the fact that the first 2 years, well, not kindergarten, but second and third grade were pretty interrupted. Third grade is also really important because of the third grade reading bill, and we only had one student that fell short of the expectations as far as the reading is with the state. Fourth grade, fifth grade, and again, these are all reading. I'll show you math in just a moment. Sixth grade, so sixth grade has done the cap of the 80% overall. Seventh grade, again, they're right at 80%, a little higher. And then eighth grade a little lower. And then we have the same thing for our math. So kindergarten, first grade, again, pretty close. There were a lot of really great reading gains in first grade with local data, and we'll talk a little bit about local data. Second grade, again, that 80% close. Third grade. So this is what's interesting as we look through these. Our students are performing better overall in math than they are reading, and usually it's the other way around. So when we were doing interventions this year, we were focusing on the reading versus the math interventions. And you'll see some where data is not designated because of the fact that there weren't enough students in that population to report out without giving away identifiable information. So that's why it's not reported. Seventh grade and eighth grade. So I put together this report just to kind of show you a little bit as far as about how we are compared nationally. So one of the things about NWA is that we really use it as a district to measure growth. But here it's showing proficiency, because that's what the state says we need to do. So teachers taking a look at their growth data, we actually have students who have grown tremendously, some of them even 14 months. They're not proficient yet, but they've done a lot of growth over this year. So we need to celebrate that, but for the state we have to report, obviously, proficiency. But what I wanted to show you is that if you take a look at our means of our RITs across each of the grade levels, which are in the center column here, that they're actually above the national norm, or with the exception of second grade, equal to the norm RIT score. So we're performing better than the national averages. In addition, 8th grade, I wanted to point out that we actually separate our algebra kids from the regular math tests. So we have 8th graders that are taking 6+, it's the test within NWA. And then we have 8th graders that are taking an algebra test. And when you pull out your top students to take a test, that's going to affect the average of your others because they're pulled out. So while 228 is a little lower than 230, which was the normative, you have to remember we had, I think, 50-some students that were pulled out that were algebra students that affected that. And if you take a look at their norm, it was 258. So if you average those together accordingly, it's going to be higher than the norm. But I wanted to leave you with this one here because it just shows, okay, here's how we're looking compared to our others. But like I said, we really take a look at that growth data. And so I've been meeting with the principals, doing their end of the year meetings, and the teacher goal data is looking really good, meaning that even though we're not quite at benchmark yet, or where we want to be, that overall students have had a lot of growth this year, and that's to be celebrated. So the next steps, one of the things that the curriculum team and those coaches have been able to do, and Brian has been able to do, is really help teachers understand all these reports that NWA offers, and then to use this data formatively to guide their instruction, to take a look at these subgroups and how they can better support the subgroups, but then also compare this to their local data as well as attendance data and behavioral data, and really take a look at the child, like the whole child, the whole learner, and see where he or she is and where they need to go. So they'll continue to work with our teachers, like analyzing these reports, understanding where to go, and not only help our struggling kids, but those kids who are kind of maxing out. So if I'm a second grader reading at a 5th grade reading level, what are some additional resources to make sure that I'm still being challenged and don't lose that edge? So I know a lot of data, I know you had it ahead of time, but any questions?
Shauna, what percentage of the district in that KA grouping is made up of the SED, SWD, and the SLC kids?
So that's a good question, and I know Brian has the actual percentage. So it ranges depending on the group between 12 and 17%, but I can get actual numbers for you.
Is there any idea like what types of interventions those students need at this point to raise their markers? Like as we dug down that deep to figure out what additional resources they'll need to be successful in meeting those standards?
Yeah, so I know that during their data team meetings, that's what they talk about, right? And so, and the other issue is that sometimes we're talking a handful of students, which can have a huge impact on those scores. So at the high school level and the middle school level, both attendance was an issue within that. So that's something that is becoming a part of the strategic planning as far as looking at that and making sure that we can help with that. And then taking a look at some of those students also are affected because of behavioral issues, and then supporting that. So what's nice is with we have the MTSS coaches, both for academic support as well as behavioral support. And so one of the things that they have really been working on is not only helping with resources, but going in and modeling and helping those students. And then you'd be surprised that some of those students who are struggling, just strategies of movement, so brain breaks and movement. And I know that there are a couple of math classrooms that are looking at, this is just a strategy, but whiteboards to where they'll get up and work around and do math and moving around, which is supposed to help with some of those students who are really struggling. So they are digging into all those aspects as far as helping those students.
we will move to public communication for items found on the agenda. It is the practice of the Board of Education to permit persons in the audience to make statements concerning agenda items at this time. Please complete a public comment form and return to the board desk if you wish to speak or if you prefer to express a written comment. Public comment shall be limited to 3 minutes. No participant may speak more than once. Brad?
Excuse me, we have one regarding the agenda, Clay.
Good evening, folks. I'll make it short because I have to get to the city council meeting. Very much right now, and we'll talk to the budgets, schools need security and common sense above all else. In wake of the tragedy occurring in Uvalde, this could occur anywhere, anytime. You can't predict it. You can't throw more money away at the problem, hoping that it just poof, goes away, and you can't wait. You as a school board, we as the townspeople, and the taxpayers need to work as one to institute preventative measures to be absolutely certain that what occurred at Columbine, Sandy Hook, Uvalde, Franklin Regional, where I graduated from, and on, never happens here. Therefore, you lock the doors. You place security at those doors. We have the budgets. We have the funding. And follow the example of one man, one great man, who knew this danger long before the advent of the internet, violent video games, children just simply being tossed away in a number system that's rigged against them, and to turn them into a permanent underclass. That man was Joe Lewis Clark. You've heard me mention his name before, numerous times at these meetings. Principal of East Side High, who in 1982 took over a school that was so bad, it was declared a cauldron of violence. Teachers were assaulted, drugs, dealers, gangbangers, and yes, stabbings, and even rape occurred inside of these schools, the public school. In his first week, he expurgated 300 students, just kicked them right out. The ones that were systematically dismantling the school from within. Tossed them out in order to protect those that were there to learn. 5 years later, he expelled 60 more, calling them leeches, miscreants, hoodlums, doing nothing more than the same 300 he tossed out before. He was effective. He was respected. He wasn't the superintendent. He was the principal. He was an in-your-face leader who taught a generation of students that could hardly read and knew nothing but degradation most of their lives growing up. Mr. Clark, in restoring order, keeping them safe, making them want to go to school, providing an environment of learning instead of an environment of what's going to become on the streets if you have something like that happen in it. Vastly worse than the school that I grew up in, but kind of similar. It was rough. He was immortalized in the 1989 film Lean On, of course, as you all have seen. A lot of it is artistic liberty taken, but the lessons still remain. Mr. Clark oversaw a poor, largely black and Hispanic student body, denounced affirmative action, welfare policies, and hocus-pocus liberalism, basically, throwing more money at the problem, thinking it's going to magically go away. DeWitt is nearly polar opposite demographic here. But a child is a child. You cut me, I bleed red. You cut Mr. Handspike, he bleeds red. It should not matter. Protecting the students is what matters. We must keep them safe. If we treat children as if they are controllable animals, that's exactly how they will behave. They're not. You control the building, and the students within will control themselves if they are coming to a respected environment. To get control of this crime in school, he instituted automatic suspensions for assault, drug possession, fighting, vandalism, guns, and using profanity against teachers. It's not tough. What can we do? We can lock the doors. We can also place highly trained security officials, off-duty police, officers, and field teams to prevent the city-destroying tragedy that occurred in Uvalde. If God forbid it ever came here, this town would be closed in 5 minutes. Thank you, folks.
Anything else?
That's all we have on the agenda.
Okay. We will move on to the consent agenda. Bear with me, this is a long one. Recommendation by Superintendent Dr. Shauna Spickard, the Board of Education approve, adopt, accept the following items for immediate implementation and appropriate action as presented. Approval of minutes from the regular meeting, May 9th, 2022. Closed session, May 9th, 2022. Curriculum and Improvement Committee meeting, May 18th, 2022. Finance and Facility Committee meeting, June 7th, 22. Treasurer's report, bills for payment for the month of May 2022. Professional hires, Matthew Dobson, DeWitt High School Principal. David Caseta, Director of Technology and Media Services. Kristen Kreshar, DeWitt High School Counselor. Megan Kennelly, DeWitt High School Business Teacher. Katie Nolan, DeWitt High School English Teacher. And recognizing teacher tenure, Laura Bach, Shavy Road, Kindergarten Teacher. Sarah Becker, Shavy Road Kindergarten Teacher. Sarah Carey, Shavy Road Kindergarten Teacher. Amy Chrisman, Scott Elementary Special Education Teacher. Todd Carnish, DeWitt Middle School Language Arts Teacher. Caitlin McDougal Shippers, DeWitt Middle School Music Teacher. And then items for approval of 2022 and 2023 Michigan High School Athletic Association membership and property tax levy. Do I have a motion?
Motion to actually remove item B1B, treasurer's report and bills and payments for the month of May 2022 from the consent agenda.
Okay, this item is not in your board packet, so we will look to approve that following month. Is there one supposed to be in there, Rob?
We don't have any, it's listed on the agenda, but there's no
It's not in
documents.
that. Can we postpone that to next month? Or can we do it at the June meeting later this month?
Yes. I think you can give me yeah, it was turned over.
Okay.
And Mr. Weaver reviewed and approved everything from that.
So, can we make a motion to move it to the second June? Okay,
Second.
second. Moved and supported. Any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And I know we do have at least two here,
Yes.
Mr. Matthew Dotson and Mr. David Caseta.
So Matthew, you wanna stand up and?
Hello, everybody. Nice to meet you. My name is Matt Dodson, coming over from Bath High School, graduated from DeWitt in 1997. Very excited to work with Dr. Spickers and the whole team. And I've been fortunate in the same county to work with a lot of these folks, so happy to come home and be a Panther again.
Welcome.
Thank you so much.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
And then we also have David Caseta.
Hi, I'm David Casada. I currently work for Berrien Springs Public Schools. I'm excited to join the team. Thank you, Dr. Spicker and the board. Appreciate the opportunity.
Welcome.
Welcome, thank you.
Okay, do you have anyone else?
Anybody else marriage name? No, okay. All right. Moving on to action items. Oh, I'm sorry. We did have a motion to approve this.
No, I moved to remove it.
Oh, removing, I'm sorry.
That's
We'll do a
okay.
second vote. I thought we were moving to do it without that. Okay, so now I will entertain a motion to approve the amended consent agenda.
So moved. Support.
Okay, great. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. All right, action items. The proposed 2022-23 budget presented and discussed at the June 13th, 2022 DeWitt Public Schools budget hearing meeting. Recommendation by Assistant Superintendent Rob Spagnolo and Superintendent Dr. Shauna Spickard that the Board of Education adopt the following budgets for 2022-23 fiscal year for DeWitt Public Schools. The General Fund, Community Education Fund, the Food Service Fund, and the Student School Activity Fund, revenues and expenditures in front of you. Do I have a motion?
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and supported. Any discussion? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. Next, bylaws and policies. The Wellness Committee is charged to meet biannually and review the district wellness policy and propose changes to the Board of Education. Committee members are listed there below. The wellness policy revisions reflect more inclusive in terms of parents and guardians and also tend to lend more balance to the policy and help it reflect actual practice. This is for first reading. The recommendation by Superintendent Dr. Shauna Spickard that the Board of Education place on first reading as presented policy 8510 wellness revised. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Moved and supported. Any discussion?
I just want to confirm, it's after first reading that they'll go on the website for people to be able to.
No, they went up.
Before, okay, great. Excellent, thank you.
Any other discussion? Okay, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay. Superintendent approved a year parental leave request, however, this need change to leave for any reason. Per the DEA agreement, a second leave request requires Board of Education approval under Article 10G. There's a recommendation by Superintendent Dr. Shauna Spicker that the Board of Education retroactively deem the 2021-22 leave for this year as Article 10G, and the board grants Stephanie Brown a one-year extension for the 22-23 school year, which will end the last day of the 22-23 school year.
So moved.
Support.
Moved and supported. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Superintendent approved the first leave for any reason request per the DEA contract. A second leave request requires Board of Education approval under Article 10G. It's a recommendation by Superintendent Dr. Shauna Spicker that the Board of Education grant a one-year extension of Elizabeth Hatline's 21-22 leave as approved under the DEA contract Article 10G for the 2022-23 school year, which will end the last day of the 22-23 school year. Do I have a motion?
Support.
Moved and supported. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay, any opposed? Motion carries. Okay, there's a recommendation by Superintendent Shauna Spicker that the Board of Education approve the Michigan Association of School Boards school district membership for the 22-23 school year as presented. The 22-23 membership is based on MDE audited fall pupil count of 3117. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Support.
Moved and supported. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay. Public communications for items not found on the agenda.
Okay, we have a few of these.
Okay.
Any question?
Hi. I wanted to talk about school safety, and I see that that wasn't on the agenda, and after the recent events, I'm kind of surprised that there wasn't anything on the agenda about school safety. One of the things that I noticed is that just taking a brief look at the Ferguson Wood School and also looking at this building, one of the features that I do not see in these buildings is a knock box. I don't know if there is one, and it's just not a publicly prominent entrance. But this allows first responders key access to the building. So when they talk about the events of Diwali and they're talking about they couldn't get into some of the classrooms because they were waiting for keys versus trying to break in doors, this would have solved that problem. And it also is good for fire emergencies because if a first responder is called and they have no idea where the fire is, it allows them access to the different parts of the building so they can go and investigate without having to break windows or doors. Also, looking at information about panic buttons or direct connects to law enforcement, the competitive school safety grant was put on a 2-year hold because of COVID. It looks like that may be coming back. What is DeWitt Community Schools doing about that? And is there a plan for security presence during times of heightened awareness for following a threat? And is there a plan for working with law enforcement to conduct wellness checks for students or other individuals when a threat is made or other students become aware of a potential threat? Recently going through issues at a workplace where an individual showed up and left and in a fit of rage punched a bystander. Then we went through a process of where the individual returned to the workplace location with a backpack. And at that point, we had no idea what that individual's intents were. It took a 45-minute response for the police to show up. And this is a person who was known to conduct harm to another individual on a previous occasion. So you need to think about that too, is how long is your police presence going to be? Because yes, the local DeWitt police stations are close by,
aware of and actively attentive to important facts and issues, especially issues of racial and social justice. Alphabet Rockers is a music group, and their mission is to make music that makes change. This is from their website. During the pandemic, Alphabet Rockers created We Got Work to Do, an anti-racism curriculum that uses music and dance. The collective offers virtual workshops for young change makers that use imagination and art. I'm going to read the lyrics from the song Stand Up For You from the album Rise, Shine, #woke album. It's time to be woke. Then they sing a chorus. I'ma stand up for you, I'ma stand up for you. For who? And then repeat that 4 times. Step back and listen, be allies. It's not about you, then you know why. Everyone is different, no one's the same, from gender to color to how we pray. Ask yourself, is the world really fair? Ask yourself, what's going on over there? Ask yourself, who's really all right? Ask yourself, how can I open up my mind? Ask yourself, who do I stand up for? Ask yourself, do I want to do more? Ask yourself, am I woke? If you're woke, then stand up, speak up. Then they sing the chorus again. To be together and stand as one, gotta want to know each other, everyone. It takes mad courage and that fierce love to bravely stand up and defend someone. Ask them now, do I say your name right? Ask them now, are you really all right? Ask them now, did you get your turn? Ask them now, is there more for me to learn? Ask them how I can stand up for you. Ask them how can I do more for you? Ask yourself, am I woke? If you're woke, then stand up, speak up. Sing the chorus again. We are the ones we've been waiting for. We gotta change things now. Right now, not some other time. I don't look like you, but I still got your back. I don't look like you, but I still got your back. Do something, make a difference. Don't wait. Once again, when we look at the context of the word woke that is being used in the lyrics of this song, it denotes the social justice element. As previously discussed in public comments at these school board meetings, social justice is a key component of the critical race theory, which administration denies is being taught. Yet this song was on display at the DeWitt Community Showcase from the young children in the school district. I'm all for children being taught kindness and respect, but I'm totally against them being taught how to be woke by the school district.
Thank you. Adam Mao.
I hope you all have read the appellate brief that was filed in the district's name, and I hope you are all embarrassed. What an absolute abomination. As a public institution of learning, you should be especially ashamed of yourselves. Alas, maybe it's a proper representation of the current state of the district, riddled with errors devoid of substance and heavy on ad hominem attacks and misrepresentations. At the April board meeting, we learned how beholden the district is to compliance, specifically with regard to Title VII, as the employee dress code was updated to comport with the Supreme Court's decision in Bostock with regard to gender identity falling within the statutory definition of sex. Ms. Barnes gave us a thorough explanation in that regard, and as to the anticipated extension of Bostock's application to Title IX, which uses parallel terminology but applies to educational programs. Fair enough, if you disregarded the sick irony of passing a policy promoting the freedom of students and staff to express themselves with the clothing they choose to place on their bodies after the superintendent forced district-wide masking without board approval. But I digress. Last month, we received an update regarding the summer school offerings for K-8 students. Last year, it was a great opportunity to catch up on the learning loss you caused or contributed to with the cancellation of in-person instruction. Our rising sixth grader was all over the place with concept retention, testing, behavior, and the like during COVID. So as much structure and learning material as is available, we will participate. Unfortunately, my son is white, and both of those protected classes, sex and race, reduced his eligibility for the programs. Oddly, ESSER III monies require this sort of invidious discrimination based on protected class, though that doesn't excuse the district acting under the color of law in violation of Title VI and equal protection. And the district didn't have any trouble refusing compliance with ESSER III's requirements that the board seek and take into account public input in the development and revision of its return to school plans detailing COVID mitigation measures. So much for the culture of compliance. DeWitt back to Bostock and the district's extension to the educational setting. The but-for causation test affirmed by the court simply asks, would my son have been treated any differently if he was of a different race or sex? The answer is plainly yes, as that is the stated reason for exclusion on the face of the summer school program letter. Along those lines, here's a quote from a recent decision out of the Southern District of New York regarding an employee's objection to mandatory DEI training. Given that defendant's avowed disappointment, the plaintiff was a white person who failed to accept that her race and job title obligated her to adhere to their understanding of anti-racism, the court concludes that plaintiff has adequately alleged motivation, at least in part, by her race under Title VII. As the Supreme Court stated bluntly 15 years ago, the way to stop discrimination on the basis of race is to stop discriminating on the basis of race. And finally, I'd like to congratulate and wish best of luck to Mr. Dotson, who hopefully can restore some sanity to the district.
Chelsea?
I commented in November about how my family wouldn't be sending my 5-year-old to kindergarten here in the fall because of how seriously the district had already breached my trust. At that time, I had hoped that the board would wake up and course correct the downward spiral so that maybe someday I could send my children to the schools that we chose a decade ago and have been funding ever since. Unfortunately, the opposite has happened. Parents email, call, and come here to speech, but rarely are responses timely, responsive, or coherent. Some of you are so silent and seemingly disengaged at these meetings that I honestly couldn't say for certain if you've ever shared a complete thought in the time that I've been attending. Why does it feel like the parents are more informed and engaged than those of you who sit up here? I don't even have my children enrolled in the district, and I'm aware and asking questions about things that some of you know or claim to know nothing about. But if it's truly an awareness issue, why is it so hard to get answers once you've been informed? What are the visitor policies I've been asking for since November? Why is it a big secret? What about the DEI committee, curriculum access? Do you think it's appropriate for teachers to politicize the minds of 6-year-olds? To have them sing wokeness songs and introduce them to ideologies which create divisiveness within their own families, behind the backs of their parents? Young children don't have the mental framework to question toxic authority figures, but this board ought to. Whether you agree with any particular message being told to kids or not, do you really support teachers pushing their own agendas in the schools that you speak for? Some of you do seem to support it. I think that you must think that you're enlightened or more educated or better equipped to run the schools than those of us here on this side of the divide. But we've all seen the numbers. The last 2 years have been a disaster for students. As a small example, Vox, the New York Times, and the Atlantic have run recent articles about learning loss studies. Quote, kids' learning losses are worse than educators are acknowledging, the Atlantic said. Those are hardly publications unfriendly to public education, and they're blasting you. And instead of worrying about how to fix those real problems, here in DeWitt we have teachers making 6-year-olds sing about being woke, administrators championing so-called social emotional learning paradigms that focus on pushing political ideologies, and then playing dumb when parents ask for access to curriculum. I could go on in this thread for hours. I've tried to get answers, all of us have, but even using mechanisms of the law designed to force transparency in exactly these situations, I have been lied to over and over. You're asking us to trust you with our children. I know I certainly won't. That is wrong and sad, and I wish that all of you agreed.
Thank you. Thank you. Jessica Burkhausen?
Hello. First off, I just want to say that, for the most part, we've been really happy with the schools. I went here, my son has gone here kindergarten, he'll be now a sophomore, and I've always been a big supporter of DeWitt schools. However, I am very concerned about the path that I see the school system, where I see us going. Over the past few years, I have heard about the type of indoctrination that is being attempted in the school system through parents in the community, other children in the community, and most importantly, my son. From about 8th grade through his freshman year of high school, he said certain teachers find their way to insert controversial topics into the classroom that are not relevant to what they're teaching, and basically tell the students how they should think and feel about them rather than let the students decide for themselves. I have looked the other way because he's 15, he can think for himself, he's very aware when teachers are presenting their opinions as facts, so I don't worry about him. He's also incredibly kind, empathetic, he's accepting of all races, cultures, lifestyles, choices, etc., and he also knows you don't have to be woke to be that way. However, I have an incoming kindergartner and now I'm very concerned. And that brings me to the woke song. I was really disappointed to hear that DeWitt is pushing this divisive and controversial ideology on young impressionable kids. We actually met with Shady Road staff in regards to her IEP, and I was so excited for her to enter the DeWitt school system, and now I'm already wondering if I should pull her out. There were a lot of positive things in the song, but where it goes too far is where it states being woke. You could have said it's time to be kind, it's time to help others, you know, it's time to come together. Instead you chose woke. Woke ideology is connected to BLM, CRT, and DEI institutions, movements, and other progressive beliefs, whatever you want to call them. And if you really take a step back and look at what the goal of these institutions are, it's really to systematically dismantle any sort of current societal norm that they deem oppressive or unjust. So it's destructive. Woke ideology destroys everything in its path that does not share its societal worldview, but creates nothing. We've seen that firsthand with removal of statues, destruction of property, burning cities to the ground, and cancel culture. So this is what I'm really concerned about with the administration allowing the first graders to sing this song. Most people are aware that woke ideology, along with many other trendy movements right now, are polarizing, controversial, and not everyone agrees with them. However, it was decided to allow them to sing that song anyways. Why? Because wokeism also convinces people that they are a more intelligent, morally superior human if they believe or support these ideologies. So therefore, any other opinion and any other opposition doesn't really matter. It's completely disregarded, and that really became apparent when I found out about this song. The movement is completely void of any social critical or any sort of critical thinking or freedom of independent thought, because there is no freedom to disagree in woke ideology. There's no discussion. But regardless of how anyone feels about these ideologies, the public school system has no right pushing these beliefs on their students. If the educators in this administration have truly done extensive research on what it means to be woke, have weighed the pros and cons, and any negative outcomes, consequences of these movements, and still want to support them, that's fine. But it is a personal decision that one can instill in themselves and in their families. It is not theirs to force on others, especially students in the public school system. And that's the main issue that I have with all of this. My son said it best: our teacher's job is to teach us academics, not our morals and values. Those are taught by our parents. Why is it that my teenage son gets an age-old concept that for some reason our current adult educators cannot seem to grasp? I am asking this administration to really reevaluate their approach to education, make sure it's not indoctrination, and bring it back to the basics. Tell the teachers to stick to the facts and keep their opinions out of it. Thank you.
Thank you. Tom Van.
I've been a resident of DeWitt for 24 years, and tonight I'm representing the National Night Out Committee. I'm the chair of the Fundraising, Sponsorship, and Volunteer Committee. And for those of you that may not know, National Night Out is an annual community building campaign that promotes police community partnerships and neighborhood camaraderie to make our neighborhoods safer, more caring places to live. This typically takes place nationwide on the first Tuesday in August. But DeWitt, our committee wants to put a little different spin on National Night Out. We want to recognize our first responders that include not only law enforcement, but firefighters and emergency medical services. We prefer not to hold National Night Out on the first Tuesday in August because of a little tradition we have called the Ox Roast, which is the third week of August. So we want to move that to a tentative date, and I'll explain that in a second, to September 24th from 4 to 7 at the DeWitt Township and Fire Station campus. It's tentative because MSU has a home football game now on that day, and so we want to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to attend, so that might change, but today it's September 24th. We're looking to partner with DeWitt Public Schools to provide a great opportunity to bring all first responders and the community together under positive circumstances. We're also looking for student volunteers that can use volunteer hours towards National Honor Society qualifications or other endeavors. Last year we did have the football team help us with parking. That night out will include live music, food trucks and catering, smaller kids play area, sponsor tents, as well as an opportunity to meet many of our DeWitt's first responders and the vehicles and tools that they use. I'm asking the board to provide the best route to take for the National Night Out team to partner with DeWitt Public Schools on this event. I have this outlined here. If I can leave it with somebody, that'd be great. If not, I'll just take it with me to give it to you. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
what has to happen to make the club sport a school sport. So like lacrosse for this last year, if you only played lacrosse, you had to pay the school sports fee and the lacrosse club fee, and that was just an extra expense, an extra burden for those lacrosse players that is not for other players. And I want to know what those fees go for, because there were those 2 fees for lacrosse. And like I said, that sport's been around for a really long time. It's very well established. It's clearly doing very well in the state, and it would be really nice to see that move on. And I don't even have a lacrosse player in my home, so just, you know, preface that. All right, what I really want to talk to you about is this. At the beginning of May, the USDA Food and Nutrition Service Department announced a new interpretation of Title IX. They are planning to issue a formal rulemaking that any establishment that accepts federal food funding must allow biological males claiming to be females access to female private areas, spaces, such as showers, bathrooms, and sleeping areas, and vice versa. I'm bringing this rulemaking to your attention so that the board starts to consider how DeWitt schools will address this in the future. Even though the rulemaking has not been officially issued, it's expected in June, which is shortly, and it does require review, so it may be a long time, but I really think it's very important that the board start discussing this before, so that we're just not leaping into it and making willy-nilly decisions, for the lack of a better word. In addition, the board must allow the community to participate and have input into these decision-making processes. If a student identifies as an opposite sex and wants to use these facilities that are intended for the opposite sex, how will the district address this? If students who do not identify as the opposite sex and are not comfortable with this, with a student of the opposite sex using these facilities, how will they be accommodated? Across the country, these policies have been implemented, and we have seen some negative impacts that are really impacting our children. In Virginia, in the last year, a girl was raped because a boy who was identifying as a girl went into the girl's bathroom and raped her. In addition, girls throughout the country are not feeling comfortable using facilities within their schools because of these policies. And we need to address this. How is our board going to protect the girls in our school district if this becomes an official rule? In fact, how will the district protect our boys? The age groups that we're talking about these policies being implemented for are so fragile. They are so incredibly uncomfortable with every part of their body, especially middle school and early high school. And for allowing girls in boys' facilities, these can be just as detrimental, and we need to consider that. It's unhealthy for anyone not to use a bathroom facility for an entire day. And in addition to that, these children may not be hydrating throughout the day because they don't want to have to go to the bathroom. They may start their day and not drink anything because they don't want to have to use these facilities because they're uncomfortable with whatever's going on. I'm asking, how much funding does the district receive for the federal government for their lunch program? I believe it was upcoming, we thought it was $250,000. How does that affect what might happen in this policy or this rulemaking? How many families are affected? The USDA stated no one should be denied access to nutritious food simply because of who they are or how they identify. I agree with this 100%. However, the USDA is in the process of doing exactly that. They will hold our children hostage and restrict funding because of who they are and how they identify.
15 seconds.
Frankly, stating that this is a government ruling and we must follow it is not acceptable. Thank you.
I'm sorry, Will.
All right, for sake of being a broken record, I want to request one more time for this board to engage with the township and the city such that all 3 meetings are actually had some discussion about this at the end of the last meeting, and I heard two things. One, that the school is the biggest employer. I'm not sure if that's a reason for not getting together with the rest of the group so that we are not all on the same night. And the other I heard was we moved this meeting a half hour early, and that used to be enough time for these meetings when they were shorter, which I took as, if you parents hadn't shown up to talk, then we would have plenty of time to make both meetings. That's how I took it. It was very insulting. So please, let's consider that again. Also, I want to talk about the desire in this community to have a two-way conversation with the board. There's some really great ideas to make this district better, which includes greater transparency, building positive relationships with law enforcement, which we just heard, expanding volunteer opportunities, and many more. And those really need a two-way conversation. There are also people that want to have a two-way conversation because they have concerns about things going on in this district. You know, I don't have a child in 8th grade, but I heard that the 8th grade academic awards ceremony was to be done in the bus parking lot. Seems like an awful thing to do to our 8th graders and not really respectful of all the great stuff that they did. And I'm not sure what message that sends to the students, but it's not good. Many others are concerned that first graders are being taught a song that says it's time to be woke, and we've heard some people talk about that tonight. Some people say being woke is great. That's their opinion, and they can have it. Many others do not believe that being woke has good connotations. I've said this many times, we all want to make this community great, but when it comes to controversial subjects, we should have a community conversation, and there should be two sides of the conversation at the table so that we can have a good conversation. I personally think this is the greatest and most fair country ever created, but I really wonder, are we teaching our kids that? I'm horrified to see that we had an armed terrorist show up at a justice's house to assassinate them. And I wonder, how did we get here? We have hundreds outside the Supreme Court that were interviewed and said that violence is okay. How did we get here? I've been here 50 years. I've never seen this. I wonder how we got here again, and I wonder how we get out of this. How did we get to the point where violence against your people that disagree with you is okay? How did we get to the point where violence against Supreme Court, which is a very important branch of our government, is simply okay? One has to question if many believe that violence against people is okay because our young people are being taught in school and university this country is a horrible place and it must be changed at any cost, and violence is okay. It's time to have a conversation about how to bring this country together, and it starts in our community. It starts with our two-way conversation that I've been asking for months. I'm still waiting, and I'm still hoping that we can have that conversation. We can do better, and our community is great, and we can be greater. Thanks.
Thank you. Theo.
I'm going to pass. I was able to chat with Jody McKean when he was here and take care of my question. I'll just go ahead and pass.
Thank you, Theo. That's all we got.
Okay. We will then close public communications and move on to the superintendent's report.
So as far as teaching and learning goes, we summed up the year with 58 Pride Awards. So those are awards that $20 is donated to the foundation, and we get to recognize staff members of all sorts. So from transportation to food service to custodians, office, administration, and teachers, parapros being recognized. So that was a lot of fun being able to give a shout out to all those. We had a lot of celebrations this spring, a lot of hiring for next year. Deb and I are working on enrollments and school of choice numbers for that draw. The bond, the bidding for the maintenance building is out right now, and Herbison Woods, we're taking a look at the HVAC system and those units and where they'll go. And then the owner's rep and construction manager are also working on communication that will go on the board or on the bond website as well as sent out to families. Strategic planning, just a reminder that our next meeting is when we'll have a presentation from Bob Brera. His name was escaping my mind. Who was our facilitator at the retreat, and he'll be And just a safety update since it was asked. So we went into closed session at our last meeting, our mini meeting, to talk about the emergency of operations plan, which has been updated. Today I just met with Chief Ferguson because we did have training that we were going to try to do in May for our staff, but the chief at the township has changed over, so we're working on that training to be taking place. We have a date planned for September 16th, and then they're going to be coming in during the summer to do kind of a run through the training and use our facilities to actually train first responders. And with that, we do have a rave system, which is a notification system. Our chiefs all have keys and access to the building, so that's something that they already have in place, so they don't have to open up a box or anything. They have those available and readily available. So for example, we've had our building searched over the weekend because of any potential information, and they're able to do that without any trouble. And then also they have maps as well as access to our camera system. We also use what's called Handle with Care, so law enforcement will call and notify specific representatives at each of the buildings or in the district to let the staff know if the student needs to be handled with care because of law enforcement being at the household for any reason, domestic violence, substance abuse, arrest. And so we have a really great relationship with them, as well as a threat assessment that is used. So that's a lot of the work that we have been doing. We have a safety task force as well that's been meeting pretty regularly to make sure that those plans are updated. So I just wanted to give some information on that. And that's, and then the last thing I just want to say, thanks to the board, the community, and staff, because I think even though it wasn't official until July 1, it was June 16th, 17th, I can't remember, almost a year ago when I moved into the office and started getting that ready, and just the notes, the gifts, the flowers, emails, and I just really feel blessed to be here, and just really appreciate this opportunity to serve the district. That's all I have.
Any questions for Dr. Spicker?
I just have one, something I heard today when talking about the safety plan, and I don't know if this is any part of if the worst were to occur and you would have to think about communication out. I was working on something and a law enforcement official suggested that there be an announcement that all families of children who have been injured have been contacted to kind of relieve people from waiting to hear. I don't know if that's any part of a plan that we have, but I thought it was a great suggestion.
I think some of that might be in those books that you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, one of the three. Is that type of communication.
Anything else from you, Greg?
That one, we'll just sign these and send it back to them.
If nothing else, then I will entertain a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
All those in favor?